This podcast is made possible in part by WKTV Community Media.
Welcome to the Be Nice podcast, where we dive into conversations that will help us recognize, understand, and take action when it comes to mental health and suicide prevention. As always, I'm Christy Buck, your host. The Be Nice action plan is simple. Notice, invite, challenge, and empower. 4 steps that can change lives. Together, we'll share real-life stories and insights, especially today, insights, and tools to break the stigma around mental health and impact and inspire positive change in our communities. Remember, the number one reason that people don't seek help and treatment is stigma. If we reduce this, potentially we'll make it easier for people to want to seek help early. Myth busting can actually be life-saving. Today, I'm really excited about our guest. For this episode is Cam Forton. Cam is a Ph.D. candidate in the lab of Dr. Lena Brundin at Andel Institute in Grand Rapids, Michigan. His current research concerns the gut microbiome and how its metabolic products can impact human behavior. This work has contributed to a growing body of evidence suggesting that gut microbiome integrity is closely linked to mental health. Sounds intense, but I'm pretty excited that we're going to break it down simply. Prior to joining Andel Institute graduate school, here we go with the big news, Cam earned a BS from Michigan State University. Go Green.
Go white.
Majoring in human biology and zoology with a minor in music. Cam first joined the Brundin Lab as a research tech in 2020, and he worked on projects linking inflammation and metabolism to behavior in patient cohorts. This is really exciting news today. Since becoming a student in 2022, Cam has shared his work at a lot of conferences, has contributed to multiple co-authored publications, and I just found out that he just did a TED Talks. So I'm really excited to have Cam here, and we're going to bust this big myth. Mental illnesses only involve the brain. So welcome, Cam.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Congratulations on all your accomplishments, and I love that I've got a Spartan in the room with me that just is like so much brain science.
Oh, no.
So anyway, let's bust this myth. Mental illnesses only involve the brain.
Sure. So I think that when we think about cognitive anything, obviously that's the brain. We're thinking about thinking. That's always funny to say, thinking about thinking. Processing thoughts, emotions, mood is a big one. We think about the brain, right? Because the brain is kind of what we think of as being that hub of thought. And it is. It's what processes our emotions. It's basically the epicenter of the body. It's the control center, for a better term there.
Yeah.
But there's actually just so much going on, in the body itself that can affect things in the brain. It's kind of like if you have let's say that in your house, you like it to be very quiet, but you have like a very noisy neighbor or something like that. Then that could obviously, affect things in your house. Or with the brain, obviously the brain has a lot of neighbors. It's got a lot of neighboring organs. And these all can contribute to things that happen within the brain. Now, the brain's fascinating though, because the body will protect the brain at all costs. It'll start to actually take from the rest of the body to keep the brain at homeostasis. That is kind of like the main goal for the brain, is to stay at this homeostasis. But it doesn't really get that. I mean, there's something called the blood-brain barrier, I guess, is what I'm talking about. And that is a barrier between the bloodstream and the brain itself that is really selective. It's semi-permeable, so some things can pass through that, but not all things. And that's kind of where that can actually happen, where elements in the periphery can either make it to the brain, or vagal afferent nerves returning information to the brain can come from other places of the body. So I think it's usually misunderstood that, anything that's depression or mental health is purely psychological or purely happening with the brain. But we have so much evidence now that other parts of the body can affect these things.
I love this research that you're doing.
Yeah, and it was kind of big to me because I was originally thinking I wanted to be an MD, right? And when I kind of was learning about what a DO does and this whole idea of holistic medicine and looking at the entire body, it kind of lines up kind of nicely with what I do now, because now we're looking at other places of the body to explain mood, So it's kind of funny to think about it that way too, where we're almost looking at like a holistic interpretation of the body and how that results in depression.
I love it. Yeah. And I know that I saw Dr. Brundin speak years ago when it was a conference at Pine Rest.
Yeah.
And her whole, I left there just like I just learned like something huge, and it was all about inflammation. And she spoke a lot about times of inflammation in our lives, right? And times being sometimes associated with allergens. So what's going on with that study? I'm sure that studies go on and on and on and on. And then we're also going to talk about gut health in a moment. But what's with the inflammation? And it's such a buzzword, inflammation and gut, inflammation, gut.
Yeah. The gut is kind of like a major regulator of inflammation, really kind of like in that localized area in terms of the fact that gut integrity. So
gut.
Yeah.
Let's go back for people that gut.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just going to say this: is my gut my stomach?
It's your large intestine, your small intestine. It's basically like your where you're processing and digesting foods. So the gut, when we talk about that, we're really kind of referring to that space where like we have a lot of bacteria, for instance. We have our microbiome. The microbiome basically exists throughout the body. But a very large portion of it, or I guess a very significant portion of it, would be the bacteria that reside within our gut. So when we're talking about the gut, we're talking about like where we're actually processing these foods. So that's kind of like after the stomach part. When I think about it, because we're thinking about, recently we looked at the appendix, for instance, which can harbor harmful bacteria in some ways. That's actually why I learned recently, apparently, when they go in to do an operation down somewhere near your gut, it's routine to remove the appendix because of that fact that there can be harbored, bad bacteria there. So we're really talking about the intestinal tract, the gut lumen, essentially, when we're thinking about that. And it's pretty vast. There's quite a lot, going on there. But all things considered, it's when we're talking about this area that you're normally thinking would be processing food, and we're like, okay, that's important. Like, the bacteria, for instance, are making like vitamin K and short chain fatty acids and things like that we can't make. But they're also processing tryptophan, and that's kind of where that comes in, for me at least, in what I study. Tryptophan being an amino acid you get from your diet, but we can take tryptophan and make like serotonin, right? And so I know that we know serotonin to be like a good thing. It's something that is associated as being a positive mood regulator. That's not the full story. I think in modern era, we think a little bit more about serotonin not acting alone. It's not like, that's the sole cause or sole fix, for mood. But it can also become, the other reason, I guess, for tryptophan is to become, is for redox balance or for NAD+ production. And this is something that cells need for like replication. It basically aids in like the oxidative stress or the replicative stress. And so, without getting too much in the jargon and hopefully not tripping over, the way I'm explaining it, basically when that happens, that it's kind of like a switch, almost like two different pathways that we think about. When there's a serotonergic pathway or the kynureninic pathway, of the kynurenine pathway, that association right there, or what we see in patient samples, for instance, in their blood, in the periphery, for different concentrations of metabolites, those can also be indicative of essentially risk for things like depression and all that. So that's kind of why the gut is so important to us now, is because not only is it also regulating inflammation and contributing to peripheral, say, inflammation through things like leaky gut. So if you have a lot of inflammation in your gut, then these things can actually leak out into your periphery.
How do you know it?
It's hard to say, but take someone that has IBD or I think Crohn's, for instance, or any sort of even autoimmune disorder. A lot of autoimmune disorders are actually linked to something called gut dysbiosis, which is essentially when your commensal bacteria, the levels that are, basically knocked off of normal. That's what, dysbiosis means, is it's no longer in homeostasis. And when we lose some of these helpful bacteria, or there's just different levels of our different bacteria that we have are shifted, that can also cause these problems. And so we know that in these patients, for instance, have IBD or have gut inflammation. And in instances where we have this sort of thing, it does increase inflammation in the periphery, and that can contribute to poor mental health as well. So it's not always like a perfect, like, oh, if you have gut dysbiosis, you have depression. But it's also hard for us to understand because it's not super well established. I mean, maybe I'm missing some of the findings of very recent. But it's not super well established that if you get gut dysbiosis, you get depression. But the two are so linked that most often when you have dysbiosis, you have some sort of, depression risk, or vice versa. If you have depression, you have gut dysbiosis. It's like a chicken or the egg. We don't really know which way that goes that well yet. But it always seems to be a component of it. So it's interesting to think about the gut that way, where it's basically controlling somewhat like peripheral inflammation as being like kind of like a main defense, right? Anything that goes... Basically, anything we eat is entering the body. That's like the first line of defense. But then it's also processing these metabolites that can also contribute to mental health, and that's pretty much exactly what I look at. So
incredible.
Yeah.
We teach to kindergartners. We talk about the Be Nice action plan, and our first lesson with everybody, K to 12 and even adults, is what is your mental health? Your mental health is how you think, act, and feel. That's what it is, right? Simply put, the things that are good for your mental health are eating well and sleeping well. I mean, we simplify it, right?
Yeah.
But in a big picture, it's even bigger than that. I mean, we're talking illnesses can also be helped through what we eat and what we put into our gut.
Yeah, interestingly, and you'd mentioned I did a TED Talk. I actually had to do quite the historical, refresh my historical perspective, but also learn a lot of new things about that. And one thing that I learned when kind of doing a deep dive, so Hippocrates in the 4th century, he's Greek. His big thing.
I'm Greek.
Yep.
How could be related to him?
His big thing was the gut. He was a firm believer that he kind of referred to it as like the doctor within. He also believed that, I guess was credited as having stated that all diseases begin within the gut. So his idea was that if you were to eat the right things, you could treat yourself from within. So it's kind of funny to think about that now, where there's evidence for Parkinson's, for instance, that we don't know if it propagates from the gut. And there's other things that we're like, okay, maybe he was kind of right about a lot of this all the way back then, and now we're finding proof for it. So the food thing's interesting too, because there are like anti-inflammatory diets, or I guess diets that combat inflammation. So,
well, the Mediterranean diet is something, right?
Yeah,
and a little bit, right? And he was Greek, so he was Mediterranean.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I think about like maybe I get too much into like the the nitty gritty of it. Like, oh, I'm thinking about tryptophan, because like there's been findings where if you increase tryptophan in your diet, that it can be beneficial. People ask me all the time, like, what should I be eating? And I'm not a dietitian, or I'm not able to really speak to that. But I do know that there are some published findings on things like that. For instance, in cancer, that was a big topic in the early 2000s. I think it still is. Still very important that there are anti-cancer diets, right? Those diets that are supposed to be better for combating tumors. And so I don't really know how to speak to that in terms of like, how that could affect mood and things like that. But it's always funny to me that a lot of the things that we think about or are told, that are like simple solutions, when obviously there's not really ever a simple solution to certain things like this, but it'll be like, hey, get more sleep, eat better, less screen time, things like that before bed. Well, all those things have been linked to inflammation, right? And that's kind of why I find that so fascinating, is a lot of these things always kind of point back to that idea. And when you go all the way back to the 4th century, then you're thinking, okay, well, a lot of this that he was thinking about, they didn't even know what a pro-inflammatory cytokine was, or like what, these inflammation factors were. But yet they were getting at the right idea.
Yes.
And that's the fascinating part to me.
Yeah. I love it. What else is fascinating? How did you choose this route? Like, tell me something. Tell me something about yourself.
Yeah. So music's always been a big part of my life. And I originally was trying to balance both. I was trying to do music and also do science, I guess. Really just because I've kind of always had a lot of capacity for doing things. That slowed down a little bit recently. I've been a little more focused, but I always just kind of wanted to do things and give a good shot at it. And so when I felt like both of those two things were competing for me, I wanted to basically like, oh, okay, why can't I balance both? And there was somebody else, another friend of mine that was doing a similar thing when I was at Michigan State. But it became really clear to me that, these are both big things and it's very hard to juggle them together. And so it became more of a focus on the science for me. And I think a lot of that kind of came to music always being there as like a personal release for me, being something that like a hobby that I saw as almost, it's therapeutic. It's something that I could do for myself that I would never lose. However, the science of it, I was so fascinated over the fact that it felt personal. Really because I've had my own mental health struggles. Who hasn't? And so something about that felt really personal, and like I really wanted to dive into, okay, how can I contribute to understanding this? And something that I always felt really helped me, and why it's interesting that I'm doing what I'm doing now, is it always felt like once I had an explanation for something, or once I kind of understood it from like a mechanistic level, it always made it easier for me to rationalize it or to understand it. It went from being something that felt like I don't understand myself, or I'm just feeling out of my mind, to all of a sudden being like, okay, I actually kind of understand how this is working, and I can see that there's a way to fix this.
Yeah.
So it became more tangible in that regard. And that's kind of how I got into this. It was very hard. Late 2019 was when I started applying for a lot of this stuff, but years before that, I had been applying for, lab positions and things like that. It was not really the most, I guess, workers market at the time. It was very hard to find positions, and I had someone at the time tell me, why don't you give it one more shot? Like, if you think that you need to go off and do something else, I know you really want to do this, why not just give it one more shot? And I was like, I've already tried this, it's been years of not finding this job, whatever. Decided to give it one more go. That happened to be Lena's lab, and they hired me as a research technician. Got to work on a bunch of different projects that all involved inflammation. That was the first time I'd actually really understood that concept, and it felt like we were talking about this before, but it felt kind of like hard to understand from a perspective of like, this is real happening, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, why don't more people know about this? And still even today, when I talk about the gut, or I talk about inflammation, or tryptophan, and how these different metabolites or different nutrients can actually affect these things with our mood, it always seems like people are instantly locked in, like, wow, I never really knew that. But these are all things that we've kind of been uncovering since the early 2000s. And so now it kind of turned into a thing where I realized that I have a genuine interest in this. It feels personal to me, so I want to keep working on it. But it's also just been such a, maybe Pandora's box is the right way to explain this, where there's just so much to uncover that I still feel like I'm reading papers that come out now that I'm like, wow, I can't believe that's actually happening. Or I can't believe that's actually part of it, because it lines up so well with what we're seeing. And it's really kind of like decoding this idea of like the biological side of mental health, which is great, because it's both. It's a psychological and a biological component. And I think the biological component is the part that we don't really focus on as much. But it can be just as important to understand.
Like, it's a big deal that this is going on in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Yeah.
And all of us know, there's the Andel Institute. It's downtown Grand Rapids. And, I know that they were really doing, well, they still are doing a lot of research on Parkinson's.
Yeah.
But this hidden treasure is happening there. And this has been years that I've known about it. And I'm always intrigued. But people must bombard you when they know what you do, don't they? Or do they ask you, what should I eat? How do I get tryptophan? Or what do I stay away from? Do they ask you?
Actually,
come on, it's got to be a party discussion.
Anytime I give a talk, or anytime I geek out about this stuff, right? Because I just find it so interesting. But that happens. I love to talk to people about that. Obviously there's only so much I can say within my bounds,
right.
Because I'm not an expert in certain areas, but I guess I'm, for lack of, I don't like to toot my own horn, but I'm trying to be an expert in what I'm doing now.
I love it.
In some ways, I think I am becoming that, but it's really one of those things where I always have to kind of, preface that response with, here's what we know and what we found and what I do. But I can't say for certain some of these other things are, we'd have to maybe talk to an expert in that field, or talk to somebody that, has more background on these kinds of things. But the amount that I can say alone, it usually, kind of like earlier, it usually gets to the point of like, what should I be eating, or what should we do there? And that's the tough part, because even though we know all these components of the gut and like how they can affect things like mood, I gave an example earlier how there was like this causal instance, I guess, this instance of like where we knew that inflammation can be causal to mood because of these cancer therapies that they were giving interferon, which is a pro-inflammatory therapy. And I think it was, don't quote me on, I think it was like 20 to 30% of these patients were developing like depressive symptoms or increasing their depression. And that's the part where I was like, okay, there's a causal thing here, and so we can talk about this. With what we should be eating in the gut, it's harder for me because I'm not really sure from like the diet side. I'm more thinking about the bacteria themselves and what they're producing. So for instance, probiotics is a big topic.
Yeah, huge.
And there is published findings that probiotics have assisted in depressive or anxiety behaviors.
Yep.
Which is fascinating. It's probiotics of commensal bacteria or bacteria, for instance, that are known to produce certain things that are helpful in mood. But when it comes to the actual food and how that actually contributes to all of that, it's like that's where I kind of have to like be careful about, okay, I'm not really sure how I can speak to that. But that is always what happens. It's always like a big topic because I think what people are most interested in is the stuff that they have immediate direct understanding or control over. And diet is something that we all can think about. We can all think about what we're eating. And that's the tough part because it's going to be a concert of your genetics, your gut health, your psychological health, all of that. So it's tough. I know that we really want to be able to say, oh, if you eat this, it's going to be perfect. And this is going to like really whatever, like alleviate these symptoms and all that. But what we can say is that it's very likely helping based on what we know.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's just a concert of so many things. And that lends to why, depression for me can be so different from depression for you. It's very, we call it heterogeneous, or it's basically very different from person to person. It's also why it's hard to study because some people will, with their depression, take that to a clinic or to a therapist. Others might not even know that they're experiencing clinical depression. Or because of depression itself, it makes it harder for them to seek treatment. So I usually kind of take those conversations in that direction, where it's more of a understanding how to acknowledge that for yourself and where to take it, rather than trying to find that quick fix, because it's a complex problem. It's not a quick, thing. It's something that all of us are lifelong learners on, that we're always trying to improve ourselves on because it's such a complex thing. So I never really want to make it sound like that, where it's like you could just eat something and it'll help. It will help, but it's not going to be like the, solves all kind of thing, at least from what we know right now. But we're getting ideas on how we can use that to leverage therapies, and that's exactly what I'm hoping to do with what we're doing.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think everything is just so interesting in general. I started my career in mental health. Now it's 40 years, which I cannot believe it. 40 years. And 40 years ago, we're talking, folks were just coming out of institutions, right?
Yeah.
And
I grew up next to Traverse City State Hospital.
Right.
And growing up was learning what that place, what the actual hospital was built for. Yeah.
And they were doing a lot of research. And so when people look back and say they were treated inhumane, they were put in, one photograph from the state institution was people in tubs. And they were doing this therapy. It was water. It was trying to find anything that they could find out what would help this mental illness, and the release, when people were actually allowed back into our communities within 4 years, medications that they were doing research on to diminish voices, they were hot. 1990, so within 4 years, research was already being done. But all of a sudden, people were getting good medications. And that's one thing we pride ourselves on, Cam, at the Mental Health Foundation with Be Nice, is talking about that first step is getting help and treatment, right?
Yeah.
Finding a good doctor, finding a good psychiatrist, combining it with good nutrition, getting sleep.
Exactly.
All of those things, and knowing that medications, you're not going to walk out of here and feel better tomorrow. Right?
Yeah, and I like to add on to that first step. It's really, to me, again, I mentioned this earlier, but the decoding of understanding yourself or why you're feeling a certain way, which makes you feel less outside your mind, like, am I the only one experiencing this right now? But when you realize kind of like maybe some of the underlying biological mechanisms of how these can happen, it probably, at least for me, it makes me more likely to talk about it. It makes me more likely to go out and, either seek help for myself or to, bring this up with friends, things like that. Because, growing up, I remember, I grew up in the 90s, but so I'm sure it was even different before that. But it always felt like kind of like a stigma to talk about mental health, right? What I'm really happy about now is that the more we learn about it, the more it's a topic that we don't feel so shameful of bringing up. And it's more, it almost seems to me, to feel better and more responsible for myself to actually kind of bring those things up now. And now having studied like, biological systems or mechanisms behind some of these, I guess, feelings or moods and things like that, it only makes me want to talk about it more, because I'm like, hey, we can actually kind of understand this. I think, again, a big part of it is not having the sense of control or the sense of understanding of why you're feeling a certain way. I think the more we can understand that, the more easier it is to be able to talk about it, because it feels less like a me thing and more like it's just a natural thing that's happening that we can solve. So I think that's probably, I wanted to add that on there because I think that first step is the hardest part. And that's kind of another reason why I think I'm pretty, locked in on some of this and why I like working on it, because it's helped me so much. So.
Yeah, and it is. It's medication alone is not going to work it.
Yeah.
It's understanding the illness, just like so many other illnesses, You can take a hold of this. You've got some choices.
Yeah, it's all about leveraging what we have available to, basically improve therapies and improve response to those therapies. So,
well, I could go on and on and on. And we spoke earlier about possibly getting Lena on here too, which would be a riot if we did a double up. But I thank you so much, and thank you to the Andel Institute. Here I'm going to do an ad, but how awesome and amazing that right here in the heart of the city, there's research being done to potentially and really truly save lives.
Yeah, and again, it's really the idea of what is our body making? What are even things that aren't even our body? Like bacteria aren't even, they are human, but they're not actually human. What are they making? And our idea is, since these are non-toxic, we already have them within the body. Why not keep studying this? We see improvements or not improvements, but we see associations, in our observational studies with patients. If someday we could take this to clinical trial, find that it really does improve response to therapy, especially with someone that has treatment-resistant depression, that's really the goal for us. Is we want to be able to find natural balances that we can amend or work on in the body that can then be leveraged to help people respond better. And we think gut bacteria and some of the products that they make are really going to be foundational for that, and could be really helpful for some people. So
I love it.
Yeah.
All right. Woohoo! Thank you for listening to today's podcast. If this message resonated, please share it with other people. And maybe at some point we will get to that point where the research has shown and we're able to talk a lot more about ways and things that you can do for yourself to maybe reduce the effects of mental illness. Anyway, thank you, Cam, for breaking down the stigma. Again, don't forget, if you know someone who is struggling, there are resources available. 988 is a 3-digit number that can help save lives. So today, thank you so much for listening. And as always, be nice.
This podcast is made possible in part by WKTV Community Media.